Good day to you. This is the 10th and last in a series on the miracles of Christ and deals with a specific example of Christ's control over the natural world. But in this miracle, there is no specific beneficiary, as we've seen in the miracles on the Sea of Galilee, for instance, where the disciples were saved from drowning. Peter was saved from drowning, and the disciples benefited from the magnificent catches of fish. And obviously, the beneficiaries in the healing miracles as well. But both Matthew and Mark relate the occasion when Jesus caused a fig tree to wither and die. The accounts differ a little, and we will read both of them. In Mark, the episode is spread over 2 mornings. First, when Jesus saw the tree and cursed it, and then went on to clear the temple of the money changers, and dove sellers. The morning thereafter is when the disciples saw the fig tree had withered up, and Jesus reassured them about prayer and the removal of mountains. In Matthew, the whole event occurs the morning after the clearing of the temple, and the tree seems to dry up immediately. Jesus addresses the disciples at the same time. Now, the difference does not influence the lessons to be learned from this miracle, but if it happened over 2 days, it would be unusual, as most of the miracles that we've looked at saw instant results, enhancing, I think, the realization of those present of the glorious nature of God. However, this is a unique miracle in a number of ways, and Mark's account may be the more accurate. I'll read first from Matthew, and you'll find the story in chapter 21 between verses 18 and 22. Now in the morning, as he returned to the city, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree by the road, he came to it and found nothing on it but leaves, and said to it, "Let no fruit grow on you ever again." Immediately the fig tree withered away. When the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, "How did the fig tree wither away so soon?" So Jesus answered and said to them, "Assuredly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, but also, if you say to this mountain, 'Be removed and be cast into the sea,' it will be done. And whatever things you ask in prayer, believing, you will receive." The second version is in Mark chapter 11, and it is split into 2 pieces. I'll read first verses 12 to 14, followed by 20 to 24. Now the next day, when they had come out from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing from afar a fig tree having leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find something on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. In response, Jesus said to it, "Let no one eat fruit from you ever again." Now in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, remembering, said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered away." So Jesus answered and said to them, "Have faith in God. For assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, 'Be removed and be cast into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. Therefore I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you will have them." Now, the episode with the fig tree occurs after Christ's triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Matthew 21, 6-9. And the telling of the journey to Jerusalem commences back in Matthew 20 and verse 17 and begins with Jesus telling his disciples that, "Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify. And the third day he will rise again." In Matthew 21, we read how Jesus went into the temple of God and threw out the moneylenders and vendors of sacrificial animals. His righteous anger is clearly displayed for all to see and causes him to rebuke the chief priests and scribes before going to Bethany for the night. The episode with the fig tree occurs the next morning on his way back to Jerusalem. We can feel his anger as his ministry nears its conclusion and his supreme sacrifice is near at hand. Feeling hungry, Jesus sees a fig tree on the side of the road and approaching it finds no fruit, only leaves. He then speaks to the tree directly, telling it that it will never bear fruit ever again. And the tree immediately withers and dies. Mark states that there was no fruit because it was not the season for figs. So why then did Jesus cause it to wither away? The answer is surely as a demonstration to his disciples that the Father will bestow the power to judge all on him, and although his nature is to heal and forgive sins, he also has the power to destroy. Perhaps his thoughts were focused on the Pharisees and scribes who had confronted him the day before and who were plotting to kill him. We know that he had called them hypocrites on a number of occasions and would go further later that day in condemning them in the most uncompromising terms. It is actually sobering to read Matthew 23 verses 13 to 36 in full to sense the anger of God concerning the mutilation of the first covenant by the religious leaders. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, and when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, "Whoever swears by the temple, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obliged to perform it." Fools and blind. For which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gift that is on it, he is obliged to perform. Fools and blind. For which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore, he who swears by the altar and swears by it and by all things on it, he who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithes of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done, without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first cleans the inside of the cup and dish, that the outside of them may be clean also. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautifully outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanliness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Therefore you are witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Serpents, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? Therefore indeed I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in the synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zachariah, son of Berechiah, who you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Now, the withering of the fig tree was therefore an encouragement for the disciples that though they would also suffer from the authorities, that authority was not from God and would be rendered as dead as the fig tree by Jesus Christ himself. The rending of the curtain in the inner sanctuary as Jesus yielded up his spirit killed off the authority given by God to these Jewish priests under Mosaic law. When Christ came to earth as man, he found the Jewish church, which was chosen by God to lead mankind towards salvation, had become focused on its traditions and rituals, even though it understood that the coming of the Messiah was foreseen in its teachings. The godly leaves of the Jewish church covered the reality of missing fruit, and not long after the death of Christ, Jerusalem was destroyed and that temple burnt. But the Pharisees are not the only hypocritical members of society. The lesson for us all is that if we do not fulfill our function of bearing fruit, as required by God, then our fate will be that of the fig tree. It does not matter how we appear to the passer-by on the road. Our leaves may be plentiful, but if our hearts are not right, then we cannot bear fruit. J.C. Ryle comments on the lack of fruit on the tree by saying, the time of figs was not yet, but that is, the nations of the earth were all in darkness and bore no fruit to the glory of God. But among the nations there was one covered with leaves, that is, the Jewish church, full of light, knowledge, privileges, and high profession. Seeing this fig tree full of leaves, our Lord came to it seeking fruit. That is, he came to the Jews, justly expecting them to have fruit according to their outward profession. But when our Lord came to this leafy Jewish fig tree, he found it utterly destitute of fruit, faithless and unbelieving. This demonstration of Christ's power to destroy is the only miracle that we have dealt with where there is no obvious human benefit. But Jesus did not destroy a person, but only a sad tree. His love for the human race, created by God in his own image, was never to be compromised in his time on earth. Now the disciples were amazed at the speed with which the tree died and withered to nothing more than a dry stick. As with many of the miracles, Christ's words are all that is required to enact the deed. Jesus' words to the disciples in verse 21 of Matthew's version are prophetic and are to show them that they will have the power to overcome all that stands in their way to build his church. As we have seen over the centuries, Christian church has overcome many opposing powers to allow the Gospels to be preached throughout the world. The mountains referred to by Jesus can be seen as the immense powers and difficulties that seem to stand in the way of Christianity. Rome, the Dark Ages, communism, to name but a few. Even the pandemic under which we currently sit has had an extraordinary influence on church attendance. We concern ourselves here that our congregation must continue to be fed fully despite the isolation enforced currently. But an article in this week's edition of The Economist is titled Online Services Swell the Church of England Congregations. It goes on to say, many vicars were reluctant to close their churches when COVID-19 began to spread in Britain. But empty pews in the Church of England have been replaced by packed out virtual congregations. A quarter of Britons have attended an online religious service since lockdown began. Now, apart from Jesus restoring the ear of the servant of the high priest in the Garden of Gethsemane, the withering of the fig tree is the last miracle performed by Jesus before his resurrection. We need to see it in the context of what Jesus was portraying by this miracle. His need to demonstrate to his disciples that his power was total, not only to heal, but also to destroy. His righteous anger at the state of the Jewish church leadership, and the need for us all to examine ourselves and rid ourselves of hypocrisy. When we started this series, we noted that we should look for two characteristics in all of Christ's miracles. And if you remember, these were the compassion of Christ and his love for mankind. And secondly, the sovereignty of God. Having completed the series, I think we can add a third characteristic, the teachings that emanate from each miracle, both in terms of spiritual lives and our time here on earth. In the case of the fig tree, Jesus' choice of such to demonstrate his capacity to destroy rather than a man reflects his compassion as much as his tears on speaking with Mary about Lazarus. And the sovereignty of God in destroying a tree that did not fulfill its purpose in life should generate a rethink by ourselves of our fruitlessness in God's eyes. The teachings found in all the miracles are both varied and encouraging. The importance of faith and the encouragement to build it as seen by the healing of the one blind man brought to Jesus by his friends, as well as lifting Peter from the rough waters of Galilee. The need for perseverance in the case of the paralytic lowered from the roof, and the woman of Canaan who was content to feed from the crumbs that fell from the Master's table. His love for his disciples in filling their nets at the beginning and end of his ministry. The meaning of the new covenant portrayed in turning the water into wine, and also the destruction of the fig tree. A clear understanding that salvation is for all, Jew and Gentile, as seen in feeding the 5,000 and 4,000, as well as the leper who turned back to give thanks. The need to avoid offence, as witnessed in the coin in the fish's mouth. And many more teachings throughout these extraordinary miracles. I hope this series has been of benefit to you, and that you have gained something from following this particular series. Thank you, and thank you for looking in on